Let's get going. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to get right into it tonight to make sure we maximize our time with both of these hockey coaches with us. And as we've talked about previously, continuous coaching collaborative is not limited to just basketball. And since the beginning, it's been a goal of ours to include coaches from other sports in order to continue to broaden our horizons so we keep improving. So I'm very excited for tonight's episode, in which we'll hear from these two accomplished hockey coaches. As always, our goal is to turn this into more of a conversation than presentation. However, just please keep yourself on mute until you have something to add so we limit our feedback. And Jon started something called Coach's Cafe during quarantine, which he'll talk a little bit about. It's essentially the much better version and the hockey version of Continuous Coaching Collaborative. And they've had way more episodes than us and more attendance. And you see, an NHL head coach with us. But one of the episodes, Craig Slonwhite presented, and he's our head of performance with the Sacramento Kings. So Craig came to us from the NHL, so I was talking to him about C3 maybe a month or two ago, and I just asked him if he had any hockey coaches who might be interested in speaking to us, and he mentioned Jon. So shout out to Craig, or MVP as I like to call him, for the assist. And Jon and I are going to try to do a little home and home series, so he'll join us, and I might join Coach's Cafe for an episode. And when I talked to Jon about doing this, I mentioned seeing if he could get any other hockey coaches to come along, and he was able to rope in a big dog for us. So thank you, Jon. And we're very fortunate to be here tonight with former NHL head coach Ken Hitchcock, who's a Stanley Cup champion and brings over 20 years of NHL head coaching experience to the table. And, when we started C3, it was a couple low, pretty unsuccessful coaches. So to be here with a major 4 sport head coach, it's pretty remarkable and shows you how far we've come. So thank you both for joining us tonight, and we'll cover a variety of topics. One of the things is what makes and how to build great hockey teams, and areas like chemistry and leadership, and then how hockey teams talk about and go about changes on the fly, which I think is applicable in certain ways to basketball, and then technology and practice and drills for practice. So fellas, thanks a lot for joining us. Just so you know, we have a pretty strong contingent with us tonight from Minnesota, and to have ties to Minnesota, including myself. So all the Minnesotans are very psyched and know way more about hockey than I do. Jon, the puck is yours if you want to talk a little bit about Coach's Cafe, and then we'll kind of get into it.
Yeah, so Coach's Cafe kind of came out of, let's be honest, somewhat desperate moment. I was coaching junior hockey away from my wife and my toddler son this year, and when the season was getting shut down, like most people, we might have been traveling. We were traveling to a game and back, and our players were kind of freaking out. And I got home a couple days later, and you're happy to see your son. You're happy to be around your wife, your significant other, be in the confines of your comfortable home. But after a couple of weeks, you realize I'm going to go, pardon my French here, I'm going to go batshit crazy if I don't get to talk about hockey, watch hockey, evaluate hockey. And at that time here in Montreal, where I'm located, it was like full shutdown. Like there was nothing open. And so you couldn't see friends from other households and so on. So another former head coach and now just signed on with the St. Louis Blues, Jim Montgomery, who's a friend of mine. I had this idea of something kind of a casual setting. And within 2 minutes, he's like, you call 2 guys, I call 2 guys, and we'll pick a topic. And at first it was like, everybody gets to kind of speak about that topic. And then it just grew, 2 days later, we were doing episode number 2. The group went from 8 to 15. Then we thought we were going to have to manage 2 different groups on alternating days. And I said, no, let's pull everybody together. And we went from 15 to 22, and it went from literally from 8 coaches to 108 coaches. We had several sessions of anywhere from 57 to 62 people participating in one in one sitting, and we did 49 sessions throughout the spring and the summer. Major takeaways for myself, for someone who's been striving to get up the levels, was that inadvertently we had created a true learning forum where, whether it was Ken Hitchcock, whether it was myself coaching junior hockey, most of my time having been spent at, let's call it the elite grassroots, whether it was coaches of color, whether it was women coaches, and it didn't matter. The amount of humility, the amount of collaboration was unbelievable. And how many people have now connected through Coach's Cafe, and truly, we just wanted a real casual setting. Like, you could just imagine, it's the off season, you're dropping off your son or daughter at sports camp, day camp, whatever, and you get together at the local coffee shop and you just talk shop, you talk life, you talk strategies, you talk about the next, a book you're reading or any articles. And I realized that more and more that we discussed this, that a lot of us were very similar, but where we differed is what made the group so strong. And that's where with Hitch, we connected. From there, Hitch has been great for me, not only for my networking, but for mentoring. And that's how we connected. And again, connecting with Jonah, noticing, bringing in perspectives from different sports was hugely important. Like, we were very privileged. One of our other, we ended up with, at times, 18 to 20 current and former NHL head coaches in our group, American Hockey League Division I hockey coaches up and down the U.S. And we ended up, lucky enough, through Barry Trotz, we got Jeff Fisher, former NFL head coach. And for us, that was phenomenal. Like, we could have done 3 hours. I felt like we needed a smoke show and some lights. Like, I mean, he was so animated, but we were hanging off his every word, and his willingness to answer questions and stuff like that. And I just believe truly that at the end of the day, we're in the people business. We're trying to bring people to a level that sometimes they don't even realize they can get to. And that word collaboration is something that I'll even talk about a little later when we talk about the difference and the balance between individual development and collaborative development, which I think is something that we don't discuss as much as possible. So I don't know if I pass it on to you, Jonah, or if you'd like me to segue into Hitch here.
Yeah, I just realized if you just add another C to your name, then you'll have a C3 also. So that's your homework. You got Coach's Cafe. You just need a third C now. So next
there's a lot of hockey people that don't have real teeth. So that many C's in a row and a speech impediment, it'd be a mess. There'd be spit all over the screens.
Yeah, Hitch, if you want to take it away, go for it.
Sure. Jonah and John, thanks for having me on. Listen, this is my passion, guys and girls. My passion is to coach coaches, and I've kind of retired from coaching, but I'm heavily involved with Edmonton on the developmental side of things at the pro level. But I'm really connected into helping coaches at the National Hockey League, American League level. So what information I want to give you here, I think a lot of it you guys probably do already, but I just want to try to explain that when you have a championship team in hockey, there's a different skill level and a different talent level on different championship teams, but there's common ground on all of them. And unless that common ground is adhered to, you can't be a championship team. You end up falling by the wayside at some period of time. And so what I want to do is go over some of the core principles that make a championship team that you have to have in our sport in order to be successful. And those can't be negotiated, because if you waver in any of those areas, you're going to end up, like I said, you're going to have a tough time on the commitment level when it's really high at the end of the season. So the first one for me is, and I'll give you words and then I'll tell you what these words mean. So the first one for me is respect. And respect goes in this way in hockey. in order to have healthy respect for each other in hockey, your team first has to compete like hell against each other at practice. Everything that a championship team has, when you see a championship team, you can see it emulate right through the practices. And what I mean by that is the best teams in the league practice the hardest. They also practice the most competitive drills. And what I mean by that is that any coach that wants to get a healthy dose of respect out of his players for the team has to get the competition level very, very high. So the uncomfortable part of this is that coaches have to put in place highly competitive and uncomfortable drills in order to advance the team. And there are coaches, even in the National Hockey League today, that are a little afraid of doing that because it's uncomfortable. For as many players that enjoy it, there's just as many that don't enjoy it. But you've got to understand something, that the National Hockey League is a second and third effort league. No matter what your skill level is, second and third effort has to be core valued on every player. And the coach has that responsibility of getting it out. And the term that we use for respect is, in order for the players to have a healthy dose of respect for each other, we have to get them to compete like hell against each other at practice so they compete for each other during the games. And that responsibility is 100% on the coaches and the leaders on the hockey club. So in order to get this level of respect at practice, the coaches have to partner up with the leaders who show the competitive direction that get you to the highest level. And there hasn't been a team in the NHL that's won the cup on talent. And probably the last team that practiced in a casual manner was way back in 91 and 92 with Pittsburgh Penguins. They had the ability, they were so much more talented than anybody else. They had the ability to dial it up, but they're the only team that I've ever seen or any of us have ever watched that was allowed to kind of put the brakes on at practice. So understand that respect in hockey is everything, and the respect has to be that it's a second and third effort league, and you get that out at practice. Second part of this is accountability. It's a word that everybody uses about being accountable. The way it works in hockey, the engineering of accountability in hockey is that the coach forms a partnership with the leaders. So I use the term, I coach the leaders and instruct everybody else. But the partnership that the coach has to put in place with the leaders has to be solid and strong. And that means that there is a lot of meetings that take place. There's a lot of conversation back and forth. But in order to get your team to be held at a highly accountable level, your leaders have to lead this part of the group. And what's changed in today's game is that the leadership now is vocal, much more vocal than it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Vocal leadership is everything. And the partnership that you put in place with your leaders allows them to take over the team when you're not there. And understanding that in between periods, we get maybe 60 to 90 seconds with the team. That's all we get. So there's not a lot of time in the locker room between what the players are doing to get ready for the next period. There's a longer conversation that has to take place between the leaders and the rest of the team when you're not there. And the adage of successful teams, what they say when the coach leaves the room is more important than what the coach says, is really emphatic in the game of hockey. The leaders have to take over the locker room. And if they do that in a proper manner, they hold the level of accountability at a very, very high level. And that allows you to have smooth transition through the rocky periods of your season. But if your leaders aren't willing to lead and you can't convince them that they have to be the voices, you'll have a difficult time when things are either emotional or you're in a very, very tough game. And understanding this more than anything with your leaders is they become in hockey, proper leadership becomes an extension of the coach. And the way it works in hockey is in the start of training camp, the coach has 100% control. But as the season goes on, he turns that control over to the leaders so that at the end of the season, if it's done properly, the coach becomes the instructor and the leaders become the emotional content of the team. And any of the championship teams, those players have taken over, and they're actually, quite frankly, coaching the team at the end of the year. Instant feedback, that's the next term. This is what's really changed in our game. When I was coaching even 4 years ago, when the game was over, it was over. You never went in the locker room. You waited till the next day, and you had conversations the next day. The players don't want that anymore. You are understanding that at the NHL, we have iPads on the bench, we have iPads in the locker room, we have computers in the room next to the locker room. So by the time, if you play a game on a Tuesday, by the time you get to meet that player on a Wednesday, he's already seen his shifts 3 times. He knows more about his shifts than even you do. So having instant feedback is really, really important. And there's coaches, when the game is over, there's coaches in our league that send group texts on the player's performance so that there's a message that's being sent on an ongoing basis. There's no gap between the game being played and the message being sent anymore. And the players want that. They want that more than anything. They want to know where they stand before they go on the ice the next day. So just understand that in our sport, when you play a period and you walk into the locker room, in that locker room, there's a good chance there's a number of iPads that you can just press a button in your shifts, you can see them. There's a computer set up in a room right next to the locker room where the guys that were on the power play can see the power plays that just take place. So there's instant feedback going on all the time. And the players live in that society now, and being able to supply that information immediately is really important to keeping the train on the tracks. The post-game review. In order, when you have championship teams and you talk to championship coaches at the NHL level, the key to being a championship team is the post-game review, not the pre-game preparation. By the time we've played 15 or 20 games in the NHL, in an 82-game season, most of the system stuff we're talking about, most of the terminology, most of the game plans, they're all the same. There's very little tweaking that goes on. And most of the time, after 20 games, it now becomes about you. But what's really important is that you can get through the post-game review in a very seamless manner, meaning that you've got core values that you have in your team. They have to be dealt with the next day. If you miss steps on post-game review or you miss parts of details, it ends up haunting you, and it's very hard to get out of the ditch in the NHL because games come so quickly. You can't fix it on the ice because a lot of times once the season starts, you don't practice very much. So the fixing has to be done in post-game review. So teams that are exceptional in being able to cut to the chase and having an agreement with the players that this is where the criticism or critiquing is going to take place, and form that partnership with the players, understand you're going to get coached the next day and not get their backs up is really, really important. Players have to embrace at the NHL, players have to embrace post-game review. Let me give you an example. Tampa Bay this year. Tampa, the year before when they lost in the first round to Columbus, there was friction on what needed to change in their game to beat Columbus. And the players couldn't agree with the coach on the changes that needed to get made. And at the end, they ended up losing the series. They actually lost the series 4 straight. And this was a team that was almost 50 points behind them in the season. And they lost because they weren't prepared to make the adjustments that needed to be made. This year, tough series against. They're playing Columbus. After the third game, they made significant adjustments and went on and won the series and won the cup. So the players have to be open to this post-game review. It has to be candid, but you've got to be selling it as this is our chance to get better. The other thing that's in the NHL now is, and I use this term fun committee. One of the things that's gone on in our sport now is the players don't want the coaching staff around when it's fun time. So when you look at efficient teams right now, they have fun away from the rink. They plan things away from the rink, but the coaches don't do the planning anymore. The players have their own committees. The players do the planning. The players take care of it, and they don't want us around. And the best comment I've ever heard was, I said, what are we going to do tonight? What would you like to do tomorrow? Tomorrow we're on the road. We're going to have a fun day. And the player said to me, how about you just give us your Visa card and get the hell out of here? And that's the mindset of the players. They don't want us controlling everything. And that's really important, to allow that space between the coaches and the players. The successful teams know when it's time to get out of the way. The coaching staffs do. Last couple of rules, and then I'll just go over how the game gets played. One of the things that's really working with our young athletes right now, and the coaches that are successful, are the coaches that really supply compassion. And instead of before, when you talk to a lot of the successful coaches, they're asking the players how they're doing, how they're feeling, before they're doing the corrections. So they want to know whether the player's in the proper mindset so that he can be coached. And there's a real honest effort by a lot of coaches to put people in the staff that really have the player's best personal interests at heart. And understanding that they're human beings, they're people first, and you've got to take care of the people business before you can take care of the technical or tactical business is really important in our level. This is the youngest our league's ever been. When I was in Dallas in the late 90s, in 2000, the average age in the league was 31.2, and now it's 25.6. So it's changed dramatically. So again, having people on your staff that are compassionate and want to ask the people first questions is really important in our game. And you see a lot of staffs putting people in place that do that. Just on the play side of things, championship teams, the term that championship teams use is you have to leave the player coming on the ice in a good place. So, and what I mean by that is that's changes on the fly. And teams that change well win hockey games. Teams that change properly and put the puck in the right places win hockey games. And I'll give you an example. The last 6 Stanley Cup champions in analytics have all been number 1 through the neutral zone. And what I mean by that is defensively and offensively, they've been number 1. They've done a great job at protecting the puck, and they've done a great job at clogging up the neutral zone. So the neutral zone is where the game's won. And that's a lot of times where you change is in the neutral zone. So getting players on the ice proper times is really important, but putting people in the right spot is really important. So you don't want to leave your teammate in a bad spot. And to me, that is really, really critical. And to the point where even in warm-up drills, you see coaches run change drills and stuff like that. So changing is really, really important. The way our lines are constructed in the NHL, your top 2 lines are responsible for most of the scoring. They're your top-end skilled players. They are responsible for a lot of the offensive input that you need from your team. The third line is a checking line. The third line is a line that you know can take a top line on the opposition and knock them out of the box. And that's really important. That third line becomes critical in playoff series because in most cases, the top 2 lines saw each other off. So the third line becomes really important. And the differences are on the fourth line. Some coaches use the fourth line as bits and pieces. One guy's a power play expert, one guy's a penalty killing expert, or some people use it as energy. And that's an energy line that goes out when the flow of the play is there and tries to change the momentum. So again, 4 lines, first 2 lines are common. Third line is critical. In order to win a championship, you have to have a third line that in most cases you can play at home that can knock the other team out of the box. And Tampa's a perfect example. They traded for 2 players, Barclay Goodrow, Coleman, and they had Chiarelli there. They built a line and it completely changed the way they played the game. They now had a line that could knock other top lines out of the box, and it freed up their top skilled players. And on the back end on defense, your top pair has to play in every situation. They got to play 5-on-5 against the best players. They got to play penalty killing. They got to be on the power play. They got to play heavy, heavy minutes. And your third pair can be more of, your second pair has to be great 5-on-5. Your third pair can be more of a flow. And what I mean by that is they can be specialists, or they can be a weighty group that you use. There's some real variance and differences of opinions on how you play your third pair, but your top 2 pairs have to be consistent and have to be great players 5-on-5. And then the last part for me, this is what's changed in the NHL. When I started coaching in the NHL in the 90s, the league was older, the average age was older, and you just had to tell the players what to do because the veterans would take care of everything else. Then as it started to move on into the early 2000s, you had to tell them what to do and how to do it because you had younger players, and there was more developmental coaching going on in our league. When I first started, there wasn't much development. They were a finished product. And now what's changed, and this is really important at our level, the players will not buy in at our level until you tell them what to do, how to do it, and why. And the why is critical. They got to know what's in it for them before the buy-in is going to take place. They got to know what they're going to get out of it. They got to know what the end game is. And as a coach, there's a lot of guys in our league that bothers. A lot of guys. And it can't bother you as a coach in the NHL anymore because the players want more answers before they start the buy-in. And you've just got to go with that flow and understand by supplying them the answers, you'll get a deeper commitment. But if you don't supply the end game, you won't even get a starting commitment from that you need to win a championship. So these are common ground areas of championship teams. They're critical. I can't emphasize enough at how important practice is at the NHL level. And there's been one team in the last 30-something years that's won a Stanley Cup that has been loose at practice. Every other team has been hard-driven, almost scary watching them practice and execute the way they do. And I can go in the NHL and I can go into buildings and watch practices, and I can tell after following a team for 3 days whether that team's got championship qualities or not, just by the way they meet, the way they practice, and the way they adhere to what the coaches are saying and the teaching that's going on. So hopefully that helps you a little bit, gang, and I'm open to any questions you have.
I got one for you, Coach. And when you watch basketball, what are some things when you watch it that you see in our sport that you think, geez, that would work in our sport, meaning hockey, and why? And what are some things that you think, in hockey, we could, sprinkle into basketball that would be efficient or helpful for us?
Well, first of all, when I was in Dallas, I went to a lot of NBA games. And the first thing that shocked me was how physical the sport was. I couldn't believe how physical it was. And I couldn't figure out how come they knew exactly where to go and what the sequence of plays was. I think the thing that we can learn from hockey is the ability to read off of each other like there is on basketball. Like, to me, the movement away from the ball in basketball is something that can really help us in hockey. And the movement off the ball, for me, is you know, I watched a lot of the Mavs practices and stuff like that when Donnie Nelson was there, and I now have a clear understanding of how intricate your sport is, and how exact it is. And I think we can learn a lot about that in hockey. Like there are routes and there are reads, and I think in basketball, if we did anything in hockey, we should practice more the working, what we call working away from the puck, so that we make ourselves available more often than just once.
I mean, one thing I think for sure, all of us basketball coaches will agree that we've borrowed from hockey and not returned is, I used to call it playing behind the goal. So like when we drive on the baseline, driving like behind the basket and then coming out on the other side, like you guys, I mean, that's like a set play for you guys in hockey, you know, like that, for hoops, that wasn't always the case. And that, I know hockey, but I don't understand it like intricately, but I know for basketball, in essence, it just gives us more space. And, you know, just playing behind the defense is always tricky. So my mind always goes to that. And I always look for like other stuff in hockey, but I maybe just don't understand it as well to try to bring some stuff back to hoops.
Yeah, and in hockey, the term is, it's really hard to play defense when you're facing your goal. So when you play underneath or you play below the goal line, that's when all the mistakes happen. So, and the other term we use in hockey is the end boards are your friend. So by playing on the other team's end boards, that they're vulnerable. That's where a lot of mistakes get made, and that's why that end board game is really, really important.
Coach, one question I had, we have a couple high school coaches on this call, some college coaches. I would assume an NHL schedule is similar to an NBA schedule. Just, you know, we both play 82 games in a normal, you know, non-COVID season. We always struggle when we're planning practices, how live to go and how physical to go and how, you know, like box out drills and really physical drills. Once you get into the season, you know, we're playing 4 games, 5 games a week sometimes. And I loved hearing you talk about how championship teams must compete at practice and must go hard at each other. We always stop short of that physically because I think we're scared of fatigue. You know, now performance staffs, John, your boy Craig, is telling us we got to get off our feet. But, you know, and then also just injuries. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Well, that's the push and pull that goes on in the NHL. We have the same thing. I have guys popping out of the stands telling me to shut it down. You can't be afraid as a coach to have your practices be highly competitive. You can shorten them up, and you can do them in a different way, but you can't be afraid. You can't talk competitive things in your team. You've got to be able to practice them. And you can do it with a message that's very, very short. I think one of the things that we live in fear of is, and that's going on in the NHL, there's a lot of coaches that are afraid to push the envelope because they're talking about this balance between rest and work. And one of the things that happens in hockey that's a big mistake is we live in fear of them not coming to the rink. We think we got to bring them to the rink all the time. And what tires players out more than anything is having to come for another meeting. They have to come for another session. So a lot of coaches, on the off days, they practice. But one of the things that's in place in the NHL now is between games, the good teams practice once as a group. And you see some teams now, even in pregame skates, their pregame skates are hard, but they only do it once. So if you're playing on a Tuesday and you don't play again till Thursday, maybe Wednesday's the rest day, and you put a little bit of work in even on the game day. But that's really important, that you never lose sight of what that work ethic, and you can't just talk about second and third effort. Like in the NHL, if you're a skilled player and you don't have second or third effort, your number after about 10 games gets circled and you get pushed out. You don't last. And You've got to put that in place as a coach, and you can't be afraid to put it in place. It doesn't have to be for a long time, but you got to have it there if you want your team to be successful.
Coach, how much of your off-day practice time is controlled by the collectively bargained agreement?
You know, what's really controlled by us, our league, is training camp. It's 3 hours. There's a 3-hour rule, so we're restricted there. Once the first exhibition game gets played, we can do whatever we want. One of the problems that we have in our league is that all the sleep doctors tell us that we need more sleep, but the players hate coming to the rink in the afternoon. They want to come in the morning and get it out. So our balance is the sleep ratio, and that's the problem that a lot of us have is that sleep ratio. But what we do a lot of times as a staff is that if we have we'll practice during training camp for 90 minutes, and during the season we'll never have a practice that's longer than 45. So we really scale it back, but we amp it up. And you see a team that's a high level team, they will practice for 45 minutes and go to the whiteboard once. So they get in a series of drills that go from no resistance to full resistance just through transition. And they really go at it, but they limit the time of breaks. So in a 45-minute practice, they're getting a lot out of it because there are no stoppages. But the best coaches in the world spend a very limited time at the whiteboard. They take pride in not having to stop the drill, bring everybody over the board, explain the next drill. They either do it before they go on the ice and then ramp it up and go, or they take real pride in that the players know the name of the drill and they go. So you've got coaches right now, they name every drill. And the players, when he yells out the name of the drill, the players know that that drill's on and everybody reacts accordingly.
Yeah, we do that. We do that as well. Every drill has a name, so you're not stopping to, tell them, hey, remember, this is the one where you go over there and you go over there, and like, so people know what they're doing. But the reason I was asking is in the NBA, once the season begins, you actually have to give them 18 days off at some point throughout the year. And by days off, it means like a day off. It can't be a charity event. It can't be a media event. Can't be a sponsor event. It has to be, they have no obligations whatsoever. And the 18 days doesn't sound like a whole lot over the course of 9 months, but it always seemed to me, and Jonah and Zach, you guys could chime in here, it always seemed like every time it came up, you go, oh God, what a terrible time to have to give them a day off.
We're the same thing. We're 4 days a month. We've got to, and we work with the players and we agree on 4 days a month. But what we do right now is pregame skates used to be a lark. I mean, pregame skates, the day of the game, there wasn't much going on. But now the players are pretty much committed that at least once between games, there's going to be some hard play at practice. And you see teams pregame skates, they've changed dramatically. Like there's competitive stuff that goes on in those games, because if you lose that competitiveness, you can't talk your way back through it. You've got to put the work in. And the players understand that, but we give them 4 days off a month. It's agreed to with the players, and it's a good mental break. But what's really going on in our league now is that we're not bringing the players to the rink every day. Like we're leaving them at home. And the reason is that after, like I said, 15 or 20 games, in our sport, there's basically 3 forechecks, and there's 32 teams, and there's only 3 forechecks that get used. There's 32 teams, and there's maybe 4, maybe 5 neutral zone forechecks. So you're not making any big changes. It's basically personnel versus personnel. So really, after 20 games, all you're talking about is you.
Is there such a thing in the, it's become such a buzzword in the NBA, is the load management? and I apologize. I don't follow the NHL, as closely as, as I would like or could, but like, are there ever games in the NHL where you just sit a guy?
No, never. Like never. Like we got the load management guys too. There's the guys with the satellite dishes sitting up in the stands, and this guy's bouncing down the stairs when he thinks we're going too hard or guys are being extended. But there's no way. Like we'll give a guy a day off from practice if he's a high profile player, but never during a game. We don't pull back on playing a guy when we put him in. Like we don't do that at all. I don't know any coach that pulls back on that. But what does happen is when you get a player that plays a lot of minutes, like anything that's 20 plus minutes a night is a lot of minutes, we'll sometimes just tell the guy, listen, stay away from the rink, and we'll see you the next day, kind of thing. But during the game, it's all out.
Yeah, that's a pretty distinct difference between the two leagues, because not only will guys, like, they just don't play certain nights, and a lot of times those are pre-arranged. Like, I know that Greg Popovich is an example. The first thing he does when the schedule comes out is that they sit down in August where there's no emotion, there's no momentum, there's no lack of momentum, no anything. And with rational minds, with the sports scientists in the room and the trainers and the masseuses and the PTs and the the psychologists and all those people sit in a room and say, okay, when are we going to sit DeMar DeRozan? When are we going to sit LaMarcus Aldridge? Because guys playing 82 games in this day and age is a major, major rarity. And even within games, they may only play, especially if they're coming back from injury. In games, they may only play, they might be on a 4-minute stretch, 4 minutes a quarter, 16 minutes tops, minutes restriction, when if they were totally healthy, they would be a 35 to 38 minute a game guy. So that's a dramatic difference. And I thought I knew the answer, but I wanted to ask it anyway.
Yeah, the other thing that we do.
You guys are tougher.
Well, I don't know about that, but what we do is we'll have our sports science guys that come before practice and say, listen, at 26 minutes during the practice today, this is where these three guys are maxed out. So we'll put the drills in accordingly, but for us, it's best that everybody practices for a period of time, and then we pull guys out at certain periods. And that's the agreement we have with the sports science guys is when the load's over, too much over, we'll just stop them, pull them out, and continue with the rest of the guys.
Thank you.
Coach, first of all, thanks so much for coming on tonight. This is terrific. Thanks so much for sharing your information with us. I've got two questions for you. The first one is, I believe it was your second bullet point. You talked about the importance of the link between the head coach and essentially the top players or the captains, the leaders on the team, right? And how important their dynamic and important that bond is throughout the course of the season. And my question is, and I think even I think you have some experience in player personnel as well, but how much has that evaluation process changed? Whether it's balancing subjective versus objective data, however, like in evaluating players, through the draft process, free agency or whatever, and identifying whether it's identifying those characteristics, whatever that for those individuals and essentially creating that type of bond. And my second question is, you had talked about some of the changes like analytics. You mentioned the importance of the neutral zone and how like coaches and their interactions with players. How about just hockey in general, as far as, are there skills with certain players, like in basketball, shooting is so important, right? And defensive versatility, where we're looking for like positionless players, people that can guard all five. Is there any trends in that from a hockey standpoint that you've seen over the last few years, as far as certain skills that teams are looking for with certain players from that standpoint?
Well, on the personnel side of things, each team has their priorities, but number one is hockey sense. if you lack hockey sense, and it shows up in your ability to work with other people on the ice, you end up falling by the wayside early in your career. You can't move up the ladder because you become what's called isolated. You're an isolation player that can't work with other people. So when we're looking at young prospects, hockey sense is number one. What's changed now is skating. Skating has become number two. And it was further down the line, but because the game is so quick now, there's a certain level of skating that you have to adhere to. We can help the players regarding agility and quickness, but your skating stride is your skating stride. So having the ability to skate. And then the third one is competitiveness. And competitiveness, unless you're a really high skilled player, if you're not competitive, and like I said, our league is a second and third effort league. If you're not competitive, and we don't worry about whether you can play defense. We know we can teach that. But if you're not competitive on the puck, you get pushed aside very, very quickly. So we're looking for hockey sense, skating ability, and then compete level on the puck. Not the technical aspect of where to go in the D zone or where to go in the neutral zone. Those are coachability areas. So those are the elements that are really, really important for us. As far as the partnership between the coach and the leaders, the number one thing for the coach, if you want your leaders to lead, you got to be prepared to ask questions all the time. Rather than give them information, you've got to be getting their opinion. If you want their buy-in to be deep and concise and vocal, you've got to get the information back from them. So to me, the number one thing as far as dealing with leaders and wanting them to take over the room is they have to feel like they're valued and that their opinion matters. And the only way you can do that is ask questions. So for me, the successful coaches, when they bring the leaders in, they do nothing but ask questions. Before they even give a recommendation or an opinion, they are always asking questions. And that's the good ones. The good ones ask the most questions and end up getting the buy-in deeper and deeper from the leaders.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Hey, Coach, how has, over the course of your career with the influx of analytics, how has that either shaped your beliefs in what you believed in before? Like, you know, all sports now, like, I mean, we have the manager in the World Series, the dude on Tampa Bay, like going by analytics, took the pitcher out. Probably we'd all say early. Like, how much is that driving, or your beliefs, your coaching beliefs, or like how do you balance it, or how do you tell them sometimes maybe to get lost too?
Well, I'm different than other people with analytics. So I used analytics before there was the programs that are available now. And I used it because we had a computer whiz in Dallas that supplied me with pertinent information. I want to use the analytics in areas that are winning areas. And Jon knows this because he's seen me present on it. There are certain elements of the game that are tagged with winning and losing. And I want the analytics to be there for me. So that's why I said neutral zone. I've always felt that the neutral zone was the number one area in hockey. And I'll give you an example. I did a study 7 years ago or 8 years ago on both blue lines in our game. And I wanted to know in a game, we looked at 2 years of playoffs. I wanted to know what the percentage was of who controlled the blue lines. In other words, how many times did you get it out and how many times did you get it in? And the team that won the blue line game, which is the neutral zone, won the hockey game almost 86% of the times. And so that's a high percentage. And then the other one for me is there's an attitude of funneling the puck, like just literally putting the puck on goal from any angle. And when you did that, what happened? And the team that put the puck on every angle got it back almost 90% of the time. So those are the analytics I want for me. I don't want all of the stuff that comes out now. It's there to, it almost looks like a job resume for guys. I want to know what analytics do I need to be top in to win the hockey game, and what needs to pick up for me to be better. So there's 8 elements that I have that I use, and I use those specifically. I have an analytics company that's tailored to what I need, and I use those guys specifically. But there's a lot of analytics company out there that use this stuff, but to me, it's all fluff. I just want to know what needs to be there for me to win the game.
That makes sense to me. I'm a believer in that. You know, what you believe can win, then you chart or analyze that so much more than just like, I just think we just have stats and numbers about just too much stuff right now, and forget about confusing players. But I mean, even as coaches, you kind of can forget what you believe in and what you think can win.
I agree. And what I want is, I want analytics that I can use to go back to the players and sell them. If we win this area, we win the game. I want to be able to sell the players on being able to do that.
Maybe one more question from someone we haven't heard from.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for joining. This has been phenomenal. Looking forward to rewatching this one, actually, for all the information you shared. I was just curious. I know you talked about making practices more competitive, and kind of, even if you had multiple days off, just doing one team practice. I was curious how much individual or small group work you were doing with players. I know like basketball has kind of trended towards small group skill development stuff, which is more individual skills, and then maybe less team time. So I think it kind of fits with what you're saying. I was just curious, is there other stuff those guys do, or do you just have the one team thing and go?
Well, this is my pet peeve. So my belief is this, that I don't want anything to get in the way of the core part of my practice. And what I mean by that is, I feel I'm responsible for the core team play part of practice. And there's some coaches that send out players and individuals to start practice, and they have skating coaches, and every toy known to mankind is on the ice, tires and bouncy things and all this shit before practice. And then it takes you 10 minutes to pull the stuff off the ice so you get started. So my attitude has always been, I run the core part of practice. No assistant coach does any of the core drills. And that might be 40 minutes. And then the post-practice, we have a definitive short and long-term work plan for post-practice. So we have the skills necessary to get better immediately, and then long-term development that I want every player being able to work on. And we go over that with the coach, and we go over it with the player. And so we have a short and long-term objective post-practice. But I know I'm different than a lot of guys now, but I don't like anything taking away from the focal point of the practice, which is my responsibility. That's what I got paid for, to run that core part. And then we break it up into 3 zones after that. And the coaches have a definitive plan, short and long term, what they need to work on with those players every day. And some guys, like your top players, they're asked to lead. And then you've got certain elements, whether it's wall work or net front work or whatever, that's when you can really work individually. But, so for instance, we might run a 40-minute practice, but the players might stay on the ice for 60 minutes. There might be 20 minutes of post-practice work that guys are working on. But other teams, you see it now where they've got skating coaches out there early, and they've got skill coaches out there early. I hated doing that because I didn't want anything to get in the way of what we needed to work on as a team.
I think part of that, I'm gonna piggyback here. I think part of that also is the fact that hockey's played on ice. is that exactly what Hitch is talking about, not just taking the stuff off the ice, our skate blades will mangle the ice, like absolutely mangle the ice. So now if I'm Hitch's assistant and I'm rushing to get stuff off the ice and then Hitch goes, hey, the ice is mangled. Now we got to get the Zamboni on the ice. The Zamboni's got to redo the ice. So I think, and Hitch can obviously chime in on this, is I think that's why a lot of teams now with the practice facilities and multiple, ice rinks, sheets of ice, is if they're going to do a team practice, anything that's done ahead of time must be done on a secondary sheet, whether it's a micro ice, a bigger ice. I know. So I'm going to assume here that no one knows where I was coaching last year, because it was pretty close to where Santa Claus lives in northern Quebec. So it's about a 10-hour, 11-hour drive north of Montreal. So we're already considered north, another 10, 11 hours north. And so we traveled a ton. And I was coming from a program where you were at the peak of minor hockey. We have a lot of kids going NCAA. We had a very NCAA type of practice, themed practices Monday through Thursday. You could have them on the ice 60, 70, 80 minutes. You could really gauge it. But in junior, not only was it, were we far from a lot of places, we were restricted. Like there were days where can't have practices. They got to go to school from literally 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. And in our first 30 games of the year, we only had 18 practices. That's how limited we were. So I had to tweak and kind of do what Hitch was talking about, was find a way to bring those themes into 45-minute practices. And especially dealing with the younger guys, 16 to 20 years old, some of them were drafted in the NHL, signed in the NHL, and it goes back to even more so what Hitch talked about, them feeling good about themselves. And, if you're taking care of them, then they're going to be all in guys. What we had to do is we had a second sheet of ice, and we would have to send them out so that they could get those individual reps in. And the more that we were able to get that in, whether it was 10, 15 minutes, typically then we can shorten up the core practice. But that core practice was like they felt good about themselves. They felt like they were warmed up. They felt like they're ready to go, as opposed to, well, now I got to get a feel for the ice. You'll see a lot of guys get on the ice and they try to test their edges and all this stuff. But we were trying to get all that stuff out of the way, so they wouldn't have any excuses once we started practice. And some of the elements of compete, which I'd borrowed from a lot of coaches, including Pete Carroll, the way he ran a lot of practice at USC on Wednesdays, where he did all competition drills. A lot of times we would even start our practices with a competition drill, some sort of compete drill, battle drill, whatever you want to call it. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with 16 to 20-year-olds that are all living away from home. When it came to that stuff, part of their development and part of their individual development and collaborative development was you needed each other to push each other and compete with each other. So it was okay to lose. You're not allowed to quit. And that was firmly instilled in all the practices that we had. You're going to fall. You're going to lose a puck. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to lose a man. Quitting wasn't acceptable in any way, shape, or form. But I think that was a huge adjustment, not just for myself, but for the players, because they were coming from a lot of structures where they didn't travel. We were traveling 47 to 50 nights a season, whereas most of the teams are so central, they're spending 15 nights on the road. So I think that definitely comes back to stuff that we covered in Coach's Cafe with Craig Slonwhite, analytics people. A lot of coaches, it's a major topic. I think we talked about it twice, actually, was practices, managing it all. And we talked about load management. We talked about all these things. And it's like, at some point, like Hitch said, if you don't form that identity of this is who we are when you show up to play us, or this is who we are when we show up to play you, we can't talk about it. It's got to be physically repeated in practices. And and having worn the skills and development coach side of things, where I've worked with a lot of NHL players. There's also a fine balance of the, fluff stuff, and that makes them feel good. But at the end of the day, if it's not actionable, most of the smart players don't want to be doing it.
Like for me, at practice, in a 45-minute practice, I'll take 2 water breaks and I'll do 4 drills. That's all I'll do. And all 4 drills start with no resistance to full resistance. And it's just an accumulation of the drill. It's the same drill, and you're putting them in game-like situations where they do it from a skill base because there's no resistance. And now the resistance starts to grow to where at the end, the drill becomes very, very competitive, but they're easing into recognizing, the competitive level that has to be there. But to me, I know this is a foreign thing to say, but as a coach, one of your qualities, if you want to be a championship coach, you got to have a certain level of stubbornness. And the stubbornness has to take place when it's your time, it's your time. And your time has to be number 1 with the leaders, number 2, the core part of practice, and number 3, the schedule. That's got to be your time, and you've got to make sure that you're the guy that's got to answer the bell in those situations. But you're going to get a lot of push and pull. I remember the first time I went to Edmonton and I ran a practice, and I told the players before, this is going to be a hard practice. And I had these 2 sports science guys, they come flying down out of the stands. 18 minutes into practice, they wanted me to shut it down because there was an overload. Well, there was an overload because there was no foundation to work with. And I told them, I said, I got to build a foundation here of what our image is going to be, or else we're just chasing it. And, it took a while for him to see that it was working, but that's the level of stubbornness. When you have core value, you got to stick to it, and you're going to get a lot of people pushing against you.
Would you guys say that the culture of hockey, because that's different than hoops, especially nowadays with like what you said about basically competition and practice, and like I'm going to get up against you guys and I lose and you win, but I accept it and build from that. That culture and that you were speaking of, as the money's come into professional hockey, is that over the course of time, has that culture remained the same? So coach, like when you first started, because I believe I'm not coaching at the pro level, and the pro guys can speak up, but I think that's been a fundamental change, like in basketball. And sadly, that's trickled down to like, high school and prep school. Like you can't even coach those kids hard sometimes because they think they're damn NBA players or something, and the culture is different. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, you know what we're lucky about? This is something we're really lucky. The lowest maintenance players are the highest paid and most skilled guys. Like you go read a story today on Connor McDavid. And Connor lives in Toronto. He flew to Arizona. He rented a house in Arizona, doesn't know when the season's going to start. He dragged a bunch of people from Canada out there. They're living in a house, and they go twice a day. They're going twice a day right now. He's arguably the best player in the world. The second best player in the world's out there with him now. And they're bombing it. They're going at it day and night, twice a day now on their own. They rent their own home. They're buying their own ice. They hire their own people to work with them. That's the top players in our league are as close to zero maintenance as you can get. Our problem is with the image of what a player is on a team. And our problem is in the value system. So there's different skill levels that play in our game. And you can be a non-goal scorer and still find a spot in the game. The problem in our game right now is putting people in positions that the team needs for what they need. And those become those role players that want something different. And they can become real distractions on your team. So you've got to really make sure that you got a clear understanding with that athlete on what the team needs, because his role might change in 3 years or 2 years. But right now, this is what the team needs, and you've got to supply this in order to play. And that is the biggest challenge in our sport, is everybody wants to take the elevator to the top. The stairs are gone, the escalator's on the way out, and the elevator's there. And that's the problem we have, is the role players, they want to be the top dog right away.
Any last questions for Hitch?
I had one. You had talked about you have your 8 things that you want your analytics on because they contribute to winning. I was just curious, not necessarily specifics, but were those things that you developed through watching your teams or successful teams, et cetera, or was that something that people, stats guys, have come to you and said, oh, these are the things that have the biggest impact?
No, we had 2 analytics companies that worked for us when I was in St. Louis. And I got tired of the information because it didn't have anything core to me to winning. So I went to him and I said, listen, in order to win a game, these are the areas that you need to be really good in. And I gave him those 8 areas. And I said, that's my thoughts. I need it backed up by data so I can sell it to the players. I said, there's no point in me explaining this to the players without the data to back it up. So I asked him to go on a study of both blue lines, putting the puck on the net, using it for puck possession, space and time, controlling the puck one-on-one. I wanted to know if what I was thinking had backing. And I gave him 8, and 7 were right on the mark. We changed one of them. But so these, when I present these to the players, rather than sit there and say, Team X is going to do this and this and this, I don't talk about, after 20 games, not even that. Now, I never talked about them. I said, these are our core values. If we control this, we control the hockey game, no matter who the opposition is. So what I did was I was able to take that into post-game review. So those became the 8 points of post-game review. And then we would go over that, backed up by video, of these are the areas we're really good in, and these are the areas we need to get better in. So any of those areas in post-game review, so let's say we played on a Wednesday, the post-game review is at 11 o'clock on Thursday morning. We would go over it. The 2 areas that need to be worked on, we did drills of those in practice. So you're constantly keeping the train on the tracks. You're not allowing the train to get off the tracks. You're not allowing a certain part of your game that's core to winning to slip. And that was really important for me. So I used it as a tool that I could back up in post-game review, backed up by video, and then we would back it up even further by going out to work on those things.
That's terrific. I guess as a follow-up, the things you're keeping, would you say they're like more process or results? Like basketball has, okay, if you win effective field goal percentage, you'll win X number of games. Some people choose to measure just that number. Other people measure like which shots are you taking to get to that percentage. So it's kind of more the input piece of it. For you, with your stats that you found to work, is it more input stuff or is it just outcome based?
It's management. If we manage this part of the game at a high percentage, do we win the game? And so that's what I sold them on, was when we manage these parts of the game, I basically tried to get them to believe in there's a process that has to take place in order for us to win the game. You can't just go say we need extra, like after a while, you can't just keep talking about working harder. You have to show them. So for us, I'll give you an example. There's a thing in our league called second quick. Second quick means when there's a confrontation for the puck, one-on-one, who's ever there quickest to support the confrontation ends up with the puck most of the time. If you won that part of the confrontation, more often you won the game. So second quick for me was a core value thing where I wanted to be over 50% on second quick. And so we would show those examples of, hey, we were 66% on second quick and we won the hockey game. We were 43, we lost the hockey game. And then I would go and practice a couple of second quick drills. So there was this belief that everything we're practicing had value and there was a plan, and everything that we need to get better on, we were working on. We weren't sloughing off on anything. And so it was an organized short and long-term plan to get better every day. And understand that the NHL season is 6 months. So how can you avoid the dips and keep the train on the tracks? You do that by critiquing the core value part of your games that you believe in to win hockey games.
Hey, Coach, I had a quick question regarding the core values. Is that something that you and your staff solely come up with, or do you allow your team to have input as far as those core values?
Well, the core values started off with me, quite frankly, me personally first. And then what I did was I went over them with the coaches to refine them. And I didn't bring them to the team until the leaders signed off on it. So I went to the leaders first. And I said, these are the elements of winning hockey. And I said, before I can sell it to the rest of the group, you guys got to buy this. Because these are the things that you're going to have to talk about when I'm not in the room. Understanding that there's an 18-minute intermission and you're in the room for 90 seconds max. You're not there very long. So the conversations that go on, they got to be some of the conversations you believe in. So I sold it to the leaders so that I could present it to the rest of the team. And there was times where I had a tough sell with the leaders because they didn't really see that this was that important. One of them was funneling the puck onto the net as a puck possession part of the game. They thought a lot of times guys looked at it, well, that's a useless shot. And I showed them that it's not the shot, it's that we maintain possession in the offensive zone for long stretches and we wear the opposition down. So I had you had to sell it, but I sold it to that small group of 4 or 5 guys. And then when they signed off on it, then I went back into the team and we presented it there. And we stayed. I had a coach whose sole responsibility was to evaluate those core principles every day. So he had to look at what those elements were, find them. He would get the analytics sheet right after the game, and he would go back and look at all of those sequences. They were broken down, and then if we thought we needed to be better or we whatever it was, we would show sequence every game, every post game. We showed sequences of what that core value was every time.
Okay. Kind of always following it up with the why.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
If we do this, this is the end result, and you're basically selling hope every night.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Hitch. This was great. John, you just want to take it for a little bit, maybe pick 1 or 2 things, then we have
this is when everybody jumps off. No, I'm just kidding. Well, again, it's, I knew coming on with Hitch, we kind of shared back and forth what we were going to cover and stuff like that. But you talk about some of the analytic stuff. We were using one of the platforms, actually, one of the companies that covers 30 out of the 31 NHL teams. And I just happen to know some people personally there. So they really wanted to create a link with the head coach, because a lot of these analytic companies or stats people with teams, I'm sure for a lot of us, it feels like they're just dumping. I'll give you an example. I got just appropriately, I've got this book sitting beside my desk, and they hand you this stack of papers, and it looks like yesterday's weather report. And it's like, okay, so I forgot to wear rubber boots and a rain jacket, but how does that help me moving forward? And what has been very, very evident has been it's created silos. It's created silos from management to development to player support, whether that's the sports science, the trainers and stuff like that, and coaching staff. It's just created these silos instead of having silos with bridges. And that's where everybody wants to stay in their own lane and yada, yada, yada. And there's been this approach by some coaches where everybody's pushing back on the analytics, like take your protractors and get out of here. And the flip side of that has been some analytics people where I've got the answer because I'm good at fantasy football, So I think like what Hitch is talking about, and what I did was post Coaches Cafe, created a smaller group of a lot of NHL personnel, real small group. And with a friend of mine who works in analytics, we went to the coaches and said, what do you want? Because I think that's been the big, huge miss. Like Hitch has been at the forefront for a lot of this stuff. But the reality is there's been a lot of headbutting, whether it's from management wants to look at these numbers and coaches want this, and the analytics people they're trying to calculate 300 metrics. And when you're going from town to town, game to game, it's not actionable. So I've gone to Hitch, I've gone to these guys, and I'll be like, let's break it down. So we did a bunch of segments. And one thing is like one of the only when we have a face-off, it's the only time when you have these stoppages and you could have your set plays from a formation. And so one area that we covered was it had been a big trend that if you want to face off in the offensive zone, you wanted to strike as quickly as possible, right? You wanted to strike as quickly as possible. So we dove into those numbers with some feedback from coaches, some perspective from coaches. And the reality was quick strikes off of a face-off that was won, but you didn't bring it into a prime scoring area, led to loss of possession most of the time. And it was very, very evident. So even for myself, who was someone who liked that quick strike, because you're catching a team on their heels, you're catching a team standing still and all that jazz. The reality was there is a fine balance between quick strike and possession, where you would see teams just force it. And so again, we would take that, create that bridge, bring it to Hitch and bring it to these other coaches and have them look at it, challenge it. And I think that that's where there's a big disconnect, whether it's practices, whether it's analytics, is that everybody is so guarded with their package of paper and information that they're not in the collaborative mode. And Hitch has talked about partnership at least a dozen times today. And I don't think, partnership, which has been very evident, the more we create that partnership with players, the players eventually establish a true ownership in their season. And they feel unbelievable about themselves. And typically those are the teams that you have to coach a lot less and you just become a bit of a guide. But I believe strongly in building those partnerships, whether it is with your sports science, whether it is with your analytics, because I think a lot of times that's where we get this butting of heads. And again, you go back to silos, and what we need is more silos with bridges. And I believe that when players come into those environments, and even at the junior level, so we have a lot of trading that happens. Yes, we trade minors. So before, at the Christmas break of all times, kids go home, they get about a week off, but it's our trading period. And so you literally will trade players within your league. And you want them coming into an environment where they can truly see that there's a partnership from everybody that handles the players off the ice, on the ice, video, analytics, individual development, and collaborative development, that I think that sometimes tying that in with the technology, we might be in some cases behind and in some other cases maybe ahead. But a lot of times we've been considered behind because there's just so much headbutting between the two departments that, again, I've gotten to meet so many coaches and organizations that you see the ones that embrace it for the betterment of everybody. So Hitch might have been like, let's say for Hitch would have been like for 20 years, he would have believed in 100% quick strikes off a face-off. Well, the reality was Hitch was the type of coach that would look at this information and say, well, I'm not going to just chuck it in the garbage. This is tangible, actionable information. And I think that's where the metrics, we get lost in the metrics, is that we get these documents like this and it's like, yesterday's weather doesn't help me for today. Today it's sunny and yesterday it was raining. And I think that collaborative aspect is evolving and creating and modifying the analytics to your specifications, I think has been a huge leap by several coaches.
Jon, you mind if I speak to that for a second?
Please.
Absolutely.
So, so I was with Joan and I know each other from the LA Lakers. I was with them for 8 years, and the Lakers were kind of almost a laughing stock in the NBA because they were kind of the last ones to the analytical party. We didn't even have an analytical department for a long time. So my fifth year there, the GM calls me and he said, he goes, I want to change your job. And he goes, I want you to oversee the analytical department. And I said, well, Jesus, Mitch, I don't know the math. I don't have that kind of skill set. He said, no, but what you do have is you've got the ability. I have a coaching background. He said, you're going to have the ability to go from the analytical department to the coaches and to the players. And it was exactly, I think, what you guys are describing. It was the analytical community, the biggest knock on them. And these individuals are brilliant. They are brilliant human beings. I'm sure you guys have the same, level of education, level of aptitude, that we attract. But part of their downfall is it's almost like they just want to show off how smart they are every time they get an audience. And so my responsibility was to go, all right, let's not make mountains out of molehills here. There's no possible way we can absorb that much information. And then on top of that is every individual that you're trying to, quote unquote, sell that information to learns in a different way. And so you need to have more of a coaching background to be able to know the player, the individual player, and know what they'll accept and what they won't accept and how you need to approach them with it. And then, and if you were to take too much to them, they would just tune you out. And if you did that in October or September, you were screwed until you'd get the next batch of players the following year. And Jonah will attest to this. And probably to my demise, it probably cost me my job. But my last year there, you'll remember, Jonah, we had new management, and they wanted the analytical guys to be in our coaches meetings. And I said, listen, it's a sensitive thing. They still see you somewhat as outsiders. You didn't play, you didn't, all those sorts of things. So, I was, and you used, Jon, the word bridge. We used the word liaison. I was the bridge that went back and forth. I say, listen, this is the information we need. This is what, because I was in all the coaches meetings, I was in the film room, I was on the floor with the players. I knew what the players were asking about. And they didn't even know they were asking analytical questions necessarily, but just by listening to them and being around them, they would give me enough information and enough ammunition to go back to the analytics department and say, hey, I want you to, here's what came up today. I want you to run this, and this. And we're curious about this, either about ourselves. And I had the following disciplines. Number one was player development. Number two was our own knowledge of our own team. Number three was knowledge of the NBA overall, and then knowledge of all of our opponents. And then in the off season, there was some carryover into the draft process and free agency process. But you're right, Coach. Like you can't take them. You couldn't take the coaches 100 things, and you couldn't take the players 100 things. And the shit had to be easy to read. It had to be easy to absorb. And you also had to recognize it wasn't for everybody. And I lasted in that role for 4 years. And then I think I finally, did myself in partially because I was I was the one that was kind of trying to guard the door. And they thought I was just trying to protect my own turf, which really wasn't true. I was trying to protect what they didn't realize needed protecting. And I don't know how they're doing it now, but it was interesting. Like, it was an interesting job for me, and it was actually, frankly, quite cool. And the other thing that we found is that as the younger players were coming in, they were more and more receptive to it. And I think that will be the case as time goes on. I don't know how it is on the hockey side, but I think it is on that way on the basketball side. I mean, kids do know, because of video games and because of fantasy football, they are somewhat familiar with the process of taking high levels of math and applying it to what it is you're trying to do, so you can find an edge. And it's not that, and I always use this too. I said, of the amount of information they would put out, 90% of it would be complete bullshit. And of the 10% that wasn't bullshit, you may or may not use 1% of that on a given day or going into a given opponent or whatever. So I don't know how you guys have dealt with that, Coach. It sounds like you kind of like drew the line in the sand about, like, these are the things that are important to me and the rest is not important to me. But I will tell you this, it never kept those guys from creating reports that were ungodly lengthy and that you couldn't read. And I would take them and just never share them with anybody if I thought they were complete BS, which I did a lot of the time.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you're thinking and what happened. For me, what I did was, we had a guy that worked for 4 teams in the NHL, just 4, because he did English Premier League soccer. And he lived in Florida, and I finally got tired of him telling me which players had spatial relationships with each other and should be playing together. He never played hockey, and I got sick of listening to it. And I went to my general manager and I said, this isn't going to work. I need this. I need someone that's going to do it. These are the stats I need to find out if I'm going to win hockey games. And the general manager went to him and said, if you want our business, this is the information you got to supply. And St. Louis uses it, the same stuff I'm using. They use it to this day. And it's core, and there's 8 points. The players that play in 2020, there was a dozen of those guys played when I was there in 2017, and they all know those 8 points. And it's worked out great, but it was beyond comprehension how big the book was and how extensive it was. And it didn't help us one bit until we started drilling it down.
Hey, Coach, this is actually for both of you, but if you were a head coach tomorrow again for an NHL team, what's something you might do differently? Maybe you learned from your past stops, or just from where the game's going, and maybe what you've learned during Coach's Cafe, John. But what's something you might intentionally change if and when you get another opportunity?
Well, I'm not sure I want to do it, but I've thought about that.
Now you don't want to coach anymore.
Yeah, I've thought about that. And here's the one thing I would change, and it's really important for everybody. One thing I believe the why is critical, and the why is including everything. In order, like, what is going to happen, they can't be surprised by. Because the reaction to being surprised, which was kind of just write it off, digs deep in the core individuals now. So what I mean by that is that if you're going to have a hard practice, if there's something you're going to plan, if you want something done, you've got to pre-warn them that you're doing it. And that's really, really important. If you're going to be demanding, it's okay to be demanding with today's athlete. That's still okay. You just have to tell them ahead of time what you're going to do and why you're doing it. The players have to understand that they can't get anywhere. They can't reach their goals without your help. They need you. But it's up to you to explain to them why you're doing it, why you're pushing, why you're being demanding, and how much you believe in them when you're doing this stuff. If you want them to buy in, they have to believe that you believe in them. And you've got to be able to express that to them ahead of time, not while it's happening or not after a while. And a lot of times, I came up in the old school, and I thought I was kind of a creative guy in the old school, but we felt strongly about some of our players and our confidence level in those players, but we never really told them all the time how much we believed in them. We didn't express that like you need to now. You have to be able to do that, and you've got to be able to do it at times emotionally if you want to increase the buy-in. And I can't express this strongly enough. Explaining where you're going and how they're going to get there and what they need to do and how much benefit they're going to get from them from doing it this way is really, really important. It's even more important than what you're going to teach them once you do get them on the court or on the ice.
I think in my case, first and foremost would be having to pay for my wife to have a vacation without the rest of us, first and foremost. Secondly, the one thing that, I've been very privileged because of Coach's Cafe was to get some really, really intimate insight to what works, what doesn't, what hasn't worked, But the reality has been, if tomorrow I'm in that position, I'm obviously a first-time head coach in the league, it's kind of, again, piggybacking on what Hitch said. It's, if you've got those core values, you've identified it, you can't waver. You've got to still have accountability. You have to. And we've talked about it ad nauseum in our groups, whether it be big group, whether it be our smaller groups where we were covering NHL playoffs. You could see the teams whose identity wavered. You could see where accountability wavered or completely lacked. And I think that was like the biggest lesson that I've learned is, as I'm going to hopefully go up the ranks, is that's the stuff that can't be, I can't be soft on. It's not about going in and flexing and pushing out my chest and any of that type of stuff. It's about having standards, having expectations that are not, because I got this great quote recently about expectations. Expectations are just resentments waiting to happen. And typically that's because the expectations are skewed. And so through expectations, through standards of excellence, through concepts, just basically how we carry ourselves on a day-to-day basis. Accountability sounds like such a dinosaur archaic thing because, well, you can't be like that. You can't, but it's horseshit. Like if there's no accountability, then your teams aren't making the playoffs. You're losing your job. Or if you get in the playoffs, you just got in by the skin of your teeth and you're out pretty quickly. And I think that's an avenue that, again, doesn't have to be through kicking and screaming, could definitely be established through standards, expectations. I know one great book that I look at for a lot of those concepts, which is the Bill Walsh book, The Score Will Take Care of Itself. Like, it's a phenomenal book for that type of stuff. And I think that the core values of that book and a lot of lessons that I've learned from many coaches and hope to continue to learn is that would be at the core of day one, first season, if I were hired as a head coach.
Any remaining questions? Maybe one or two more.
I have one for John. When you said the themed practice, I think I know what you mean by that, but could you elaborate what you meant by that when you said you had the themed practices?
Sure. So before I went to junior last year, and it was my second time in junior, I think I saw some people had email addresses to Bates College. Did I see that at one point? Were there some Bates College coaches or something like that?
Yeah, well, funny that you said that. I previously worked at Bates, but I had invited the women's staff on to in the coaching community, so they'll be watching this. Shout out to Bates.
So, well, I coached the Lewiston Maniacs. I was an
Okay,
assistant
cool.
coach in Lewiston, and we used to go to Bates all the time for lunch. Yeah, the theme part was, especially in midget, we had more of an NCAA type of schedule, Monday through Thursday. So Monday was that skill development day. In one way, shape, or form, did we have players applying pressure, skill movements, shooting, passing, a lot of the foundation skills that allows you to execute. Tuesday was Battle Tuesday. And again, took that from a concept. Pete Carroll, the Win Forever book. I go way back to when he was, being featured on 60 Minutes where they followed him at practice. He had that DVD that came out at one point. And Wednesdays, his practices at USC was the field was all chopped up in these little battle drills. And very similar to what we've done in hockey now for quite some time now is these small area games, battle drills in a restrained area, works on awareness, works on compete. You can work on conditioning mentally and physically. And then as you moved on in the week, it was about executing the core, executing the team game. And, obviously in hockey, we have special teams. You get a penalty, you're up by one or two players on the ice or vice versa. And so those were the themes. The challenge in junior, and again, the first 30 games of the year, we only had 19 practices, was focusing on getting better at 1 to 2 things in a practice, whether it was 45 minutes, whether it was 60 minutes, and trying to bring that element of theme to my new team, but realizing that you had to be really precise with our time, really precise. Because also, as you can imagine, the more north you go, the more snow you get, the colder you get, and that actually would play into how we would manage the players because it could be downright miserable. I'd remember at this time of year, 3:15 in the afternoon, it's pitch black, right? So, the previous coach, and I had nothing against him, but the previous coach on some days would do 2-a-days where they practice early in the morning at 9 o'clock for almost 2 hours. Then they go to school, then they come back to the rink. They've barely spent any time in the sunlight and stuff like that. So bringing those types of themes meant the guys would easily identify with, this is the area of the game that I'm trying to get better at. And that goes back again, the why. I think that why, that purpose, that actionable aspect to what we present to the players, whether it's the resource of the practice itself, or it's in any of our verbiage, we avoid the muddied waters. And by doing that, the questions, it's not about getting rid of questions or, I have no fear in having those questions because I don't think I'm being questioned, like my authority is being questioned. But I think what's happened by applying that on a regular basis is the questions have come in, but they're a little bit more precise instead of, let's call it the way it is. Some guys will ask questions just to suck up to the coaches sometimes. Some guys are completely in left field, and that's fine because they learn at a different rate, and that's fine as well. But I felt as as the themes went along, the purpose, the why was very evident, that the questions coming in and the feedback and the conversations back and forth overall was very much more precise because they knew what they were working on that day.
Appreciate it. Also, if both of you, I like how you talk about, I think there's a lot of correlation definitely with professional basketball with this, but I think really all the levels. You spoke to how the NHL has gotten younger, so it's more about developing the players and what have you. Like how, like over the course of your career, coach, like how have you done that, or how have you changed, like, you know, from coaching more veterans where you could just say, hey, here's what we're going to do, to really like trying to get a kid and a player to where he can be of more value and help to you in your program?
Well, just based on economics, because we coach in a cap world, getting the players, you're getting younger players who aren't as polished. And so understand something, that in the National Hockey League, everybody talks about defense. It's not defense that wins in the National Hockey League, it's checking. And that's the biggest challenge that players come to us from college or from junior, is that they lack the ability to check. And that means that you've got to be good at transition from defense to offense or from offense to defense. So your job as a coach and your staff, and a lot of times the younger players are the responsibility of your assistant coaches, your job is to speed up their minds. Their physical tools are where they're at. They're going to get stronger. They're not as strong as they are at the moment, but your job is to get them up emotionally and mentally. Can you speed up that thinking process? So you put a lot of drills in place, and you put a lot of sequences in place that are going to help them get part of that transition game quicker. And so that's why when you see coaches run drills, they run them continuously. When you see a practice go, like the opening drill that I run lasts 12 minutes, and it's continuous. And I just bark it through. The next series, we take a break at 12 minutes, and then the next series lasts 16 minutes straight. And you're going, you catch water, there's a break during the drill that you can catch the water, but you got to go. And so we've run 2 sequences of drills, all transition, all going from 0 resistance to full resistance in 28 minutes. And so everything is done at such a pace. And then you put the responsibility of the mental growth, how you can speed up his thinking, a lot of that on the assistant coaches. They've got to help him. Because you got the big group, and you can't, your responsibility is, like I said, you instruct everybody as the head coach, but your major responsibility is with the leaders. Because if the leaders don't buy it, it can't be sold.
Thanks, coach.
Good deal. Well, this has been awesome. Let's wrap it up tonight. And thank you for everyone for participating tonight. Coach Goyens and Hitchcock, this has been phenomenal. My hockey's pretty limited, but it's really good for all of us to kind of get outside of ourselves, get outside of our sports. And I think there's a lot more comparisons than we think, just, when you initially think about the 2 different sports. So thank you both for joining us. I'll send out a link to the video from tonight in the next couple days, as well as a contact list and a little recap of tonight. And we'll see what the future holds for C3. I'm very proud that we got through a second season this fall, but I think it's the right time to end these collaborative learning series as we're getting into the holidays. Some colleges are starting games, this week, and NBA training camp starts in less than a week. So for those of us that will have seasons, or at least the start of a season this year, best of luck. For those of you that are not playing games this year, just continue to work with your teams and provide guidance and inspiration for your players. I just want to talk about a few goals for the future of C3. My plan is still to hold a clinic down the road. So we'll see what happens with that, with COVID-19 and how the country opens back up. but be on the lookout for that hopefully next off season, maybe in Sacramento, maybe at Roseville in Chicago. Shout out to Joe Griffin. And the second thing is my plan is to bring these collaborative learning series back. Hopefully we'll get some more coaches outside of basketball. Hitch and John, you guys are more than welcome to come back anytime. I think we'll get some football folks as well in the next season of these. And hopefully that'll be next summer in some way, shape, or form. And then lastly, and most importantly, I hope that this community just continues to grow and develop in natural ways. That's beyond me. Tommy ran it last week. I wasn't able to be here. That's a perfect example. And I've loved getting to know some of the people that I didn't know before this started. So that's one of the main goals of C3. You all have each other's contact information. So I hope that authentic relationships continue to start and cultivate even without the weekly Zoom calls. Shameless plug, but if anyone wants to make a donation, feel free to visit our website, which you can find in my email signature, and scroll down the home page. You'll see a donate button, and just click that. And as Tommy talked about at the end of last session, please have a safe holiday season and just really enjoy the time with your family. 2020 has been quite the year, so hopefully you can end it on a high note safely with your loved ones. I'm able to be back with my family for these holidays for the first time in a long, long time. So take advantage of that. Let me know if anyone else has any questions, but thank you all. This has been great.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, John.
Thanks for having me.